Hey guys, tonight we drift into the enigmatic world of ancient Egypt. Not through its sun-baked temples by day, but under the mysterious veil of night into the realm of dreams and divine visions. Imagine the cool desert air settling over the land, the Nile a silver ribbon under a canopy of brilliant stars. And within the darkened mud brick homes and temple precincts, minds adrift in the potent landscapes of sleep. For the ancient Egyptians, these weren't just random firings of the brain. Night visions were serious business. Messages from the gods, warnings from spirits, or glimpses into the future. Honestly, with the kind of detailed interpretations and the potential for a dream to be a direct memo from an all-powerful deity, you'd probably misinterpret a divine weather forecast as a command to build a giant goose statue and end up in a whole heap of otherworldly trouble before you even had your morning fig. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It always means a lot to hear from you, so feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments below. It's fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As the last golden rays of Ra the sun god dip below the western horizon, a different kind of awareness settles over the land of Kemet. The bustling energy of the day, the clamor of marketplaces, the rhythmic chants of laborers, the creak of shadufs lifting water from the life-giving Nile, gives way to a deeper quiet. Perhaps you're in a simple village, the mud brick houses clustered together, the only light coming from the moon, the stars, or the flicker of a small oil lamp within a home. Or maybe you find yourself near a grand temple complex, its massive pylons silhouetted against the darkening sky, an aura of ancient mystery and sacred power emanating from within its walls. The air grows cooler, carrying the scent of unseen desert blooms, the damp earth along the riverbank, and perhaps the distant haunting call of a jackal Anubis's sacred animal messenger between worlds. This is the time when the veil between the waking world and other realms was believed to thin. This is the time of dreams. For the ancient Egyptians, dreams, or RSWT as they called them, were far more than just the brain's way of processing the day's events, or a bit of subconscious fluff. A mainstream historical fact is that they held a profound belief that dreams were a significant, often direct channel of communication between humans and the divine or supernatural spheres. These weren't just your brain idly replaying that awkward conversation you had with the local beer brewer. This was prime time for receiving messages of cosmic importance. They believed that gods and goddesses, from the mighty Amun-Ra, king of the gods, to Thoth, the wise ibis-headed deity of knowledge and writing, or Hathor, the joyful goddess of love and protection, or even the household protector Bes, with his fearsome but friendly visage, could choose to speak to mortals in their sleep. Forget, I had the weirdest dream last night. In ancient Egypt, that was more like, right. I think Osiris just sent me a very cryptic, multi-layered PowerPoint presentation full of symbolic imagery while I was asleep, and I desperately need someone with a theology degree and a good understanding of hieroglyphic subtext to help me unpack it before breakfast. It wasn't just the great gods either. The spirits of deceased ancestors, the ox, were also thought to sometimes visit the dreams of their living relatives, perhaps offering guidance warnings or even making demands. And then, of course, there was the other side of the coin, the possibility of more malevolent entities, troublesome spirits, or minor demons attempting to send deceptive or frightening visions. So a dream wasn't just a dream, it was a potential communique from another dimension, requiring careful attention and very often expert interpretation. This deep reverence for the power and significance of dreams permeated all levels of Egyptian society. Pharaoh himself would pay close attention to his night visions, as they could be interpreted as divine mandates or prophecies concerning the fate of the entire kingdom, influencing state decisions, religious policy, or even the undertaking of massive building projects. But it wasn't just the elite. Ordinary farmers, artisans, mothers, and soldiers. Everyone experienced dreams, and everyone understood that these fleeting nocturnal narratives could hold vital clues about their health, their harvest, the well-being of their family, or impending fortune or misfortune. Their version of a particularly vivid nightmare wasn't just about, say, being unprepared for an exam on advanced chariot maintenance. It might involve a rather grumpy-looking hippo goddess like Taweret, giving you some unexpectedly stern life advice about your recent life choices. which you definitely want to get professionally analyzed by someone in a leopard skin and a lot of sacred incense. A quirky and rather telling tidbit about this is the existence of specific, almost formulaic rituals that people were advised to perform immediately upon waking, if they'd had a particularly troubling or ominous dream. This might involve reciting a protective spell sometimes, while spitting to ward off any evil influence the dream might portend, or even confessing the bad dream to the rising sun, with the belief that its purifying light could help dissipate the negative power. You wouldn't just hit the snooze button and try to forget about that dream where all your teeth fell out, a common anxiety dream. Even then, apparently often interpreted as meaning the loss of relatives. You'd be up at dawn, possibly with a list ready to perform some serious spiritual damage control. Egyptologists still debate the precise nuances and distinctions that ordinary ancient Egyptians might have made between what they considered truly divine or significant dreams freighted with important messages from higher powers, and the more mundane, everyday dream content that might have simply reflected their daily worries or desires. And furthermore, how universally accessible expert priestly interpretation actually was for the common populace across all regions in historical periods, versus it being a service more readily available to the wealthier or more influential members of society. What is undeniable, however, is that as night fell along the Nile and you drifted off to sleep in your ancient Egyptian dwelling, you weren't just entering a state of unconsciousness. You were in the deeply held belief of the time, potentially opening a door to other worlds, becoming a receptive vessel for messages from gods, spirits, and the mysterious forces that shaped destiny. The visions that flickered behind your eyelids were not to be dismissed lightly. They were potent. They were meaningful, and often they were deeply enigmatic, requiring the wisdom and specialized knowledge of those who dedicated their lives to understanding the sacred, the priests, the interpreters of these mysterious night visions. The stage is set, the stars are out, and the dream world awaits. The veil of an ancient Egyptian night, as you've now sensed, was not merely a time for physical rest, but a period pregnant with possibility, a conduit through which messages from realms beyond the waking world might flow into the minds of mortals. These dreams, these RSSWT, were considered potent, imbued with meaning from God's ancestors or sometimes more shadowy entities. But a message, however profound, is useless if it cannot be understood. And so you can imagine the often urgent, deeply human need that arose within individuals, from the mightiest pharaoh to the humblest reed cutter, to unravel these mysterious night visions, to seek out the divine truth that might be hidden within their strange symbolic narratives. Why this urgency? Why this deep-seated conviction that dreams demanded interpretation? Well, a mainstream historical fact is that ancient Egyptians across all levels of society actively sought to understand their dreams because these visions were believed to hold the keys to so many vital aspects of life and fate. This wasn't just idle curiosity about the quirky contents of one's subconscious. This was about survival, prosperity, health, and maintaining one's place in the divinely ordered cosmos of my. It wasn't simply a case of waking up and saying, that was a weird dream about a talking baboon giving me investment advice. It was more like, right, the great god Thoth, in the guise of a talking baboon, has just imparted some potentially life-altering financial counsel in my sleep. And I absolutely must decipher whether he meant I should buy more barley futures or if he was subtly warning me about my cousin Mena's dodgy donkey cart dealership. One of the most powerful drivers for seeking dream interpretation was undoubtedly fear. Nightmares or dreams filled with disturbing, ominous imagery, perhaps visions of sickness, of dangerous animals, of collapsing buildings, or of angry gods, would leave the dreamer in a state of profound anxiety. Was this a warning of impending doom? Did it foretell the death of a loved one, the failure of the harvest, or some other catastrophe? The uncertainty itself could be tormenting. Therefore, an urgent consultation with a dream interpreter. A priest skilled in such matters was sought to understand the threat, and crucially to learn what rituals or offerings might be necessary to avert the foretold disaster. Conversely, dreams could also bring immense hope. Visions of abundance, of smiling gods bestowing blessings of successful ventures, or of personal advancement could fill the dreamer with excitement. But even then, interpretation was sought. Was this truly a promise of good fortune? Were there specific actions the dreamer needed to take to ensure this auspicious outcome? Confirmation and guidance were essential. Imagine dreaming that Pharaoh himself has smiled upon you and offered you a promotion to chief overseer of royal sandals. You definitely want a second opinion from a dream professional to confirm that this wasn't just a wish fulfillment fantasy brought on by eating too many honey cakes before bed, and to find out if you should start practicing your most deferential bows. Dreams were also seen as a vital source of guidance for important personal and even state decisions. Should you embark on that long trading journey up the Nile, is this the right person to marry? Is it a propitious time to begin building a new tomb? A dream properly interpreted could provide a divine green light or a clear celestial stop sign. For pharaohs and high officials, dreams could influence matters of war and peace, the founding of temples, or responses to national crises. Remember Joseph in the biblical tale interpreting Pharaoh's dreams of fat and lean kine. While that story comes from a later period and a different cultural context, it reflects the widespread, ancient Near Eastern belief, certainly shared by the Egyptians, in the power of royal dreams to shape the destiny of nations. Healing was another crucial area where dream interpretation played a role. The practice of incubation, which we'll explore more later, involved deliberately sleeping in a sacred temple precinct in the hope of receiving a diagnostic or therapeutic dream from a healing deity, like Imhotep, the deified architect and physician, or Serapis in later Greco-Roman times. The priest would then interpret this dream to understand the nature of the illness and the prescribed cure. And of course, in a society that held such a profound connection with its deceased ancestors, dreams were often seen as a conduit for communication with the dead. A departed relative might appear in a dream to offer comfort, to give advice, or perhaps to make a request. Maybe they needed more offerings at their tomb, or they were unhappy about something among the living. Understanding these messages was vital for maintaining good relations with the spirits of the ancestors, which was considered essential for the family's ongoing prosperity and well-being. A quirky and very human tidbit is that people sometimes sought dream interpretations for surprisingly practical, everyday problems. Perhaps you'd lost a valuable tool, or a neighbor had accused you of misplacing their prize-winning pet mongoose. A dream, it was hoped, might just reveal the whereabouts of the lost item, or hint at the truth behind a confusing local dispute. A sort of divine lost and found, or a celestial private investigator service. Egyptologists still debate the exact balance between the perceived psychological solace and emotional comfort offered by the process of dream interpretation. That is its power to simply ease anxiety by providing a coherent framework of meaning for often chaotic dream experiences. And the actual perceived pragmatic utility of these interpretations in directly influencing concrete day-to-day actions, major life decisions, and even official statecraft in ancient Egyptian society. What is certain is that for the ancient Egyptian, an uninterpreted dream, especially a vivid, recurring, or particularly unsettling one, was a source of considerable unease. It was a divine message left unopened, a celestial letter unread, a potential warning unheeded, or a blessing unclaimed. This deep-seated human need to understand, to find meaning, to navigate the uncertainties of life with some measure of divine guidance or foreknowledge is what drove them time and again from their sleeping mats to the temple gates, seeking out those individuals believed to possess the sacred knowledge and divine inspiration to unravel the mysterious pronouncements that came cloaked in the enigmatic veil of night. That urgent, pressing human need to understand your night visions, to decipher whether that dream of 7 fat cows followed by 7 lean ones was a divine stock market tip or a warning to start stockpiling your grain, is what would inevitably lead you, the ancient Egyptian dreamer, to seek out an expert. You wouldn't just discuss your bizarre nocturnal narratives over breakfast with your family, hoping for a consensus on whether the talking hippo is being literal or deeply metaphorical. No, for matters as potentially significant as messages from the gods or portents of the future, you would turn to a specialized class of individuals, men steeped in sacred lore, literate in the complex hieroglyphs, and believed to possess the wisdom and divine connection to interpret these mysterious communications, the priests. Now, not just any priest who happened to be sweeping the temple courtyard would do. A mainstream historical fact is that within the vast and often highly specialized priesthood of ancient Egypt, certain categories of priests were particularly associated with sacred texts, rituals, and the interpretation of divine signs, including dreams. Chief among these were the lector priests known as Kari Hebet. These were the highly educated, Keepers of the sacred books, Aya, distinguished by the papyrus scroll they often carried or were depicted with. They were masters of ritual capable of reciting the potent spells and incantations necessary for temple ceremonies, funerary rites, and protective magic. Their deep knowledge of religious texts, myths, and symbolism made them prime candidates for unraveling the enigmatic language of dreams. You might also encounter individuals referred to by titles like Hari Seshta, which translates to something like Master of Secrets or Chief of Secrets. These were priests privy to the more esoteric knowledge of the temples, and dream interpretation with its reliance on hidden meanings and divine communication would certainly fall under their purview. You wouldn't just find these experts listed in the local papyrus phone book under dream deciphering services or night vision analysis and spiritual consulting. Their qualifications were significantly more demanding, probably involving decades of rigorous study fluency in advanced hieroglyphic symbolism, a PhD in comparative divine messaging, and hopefully a direct, if occasional, line to Thoth, the god of wisdom, on a particularly clear reception day. The training for such a priest was long and arduous, usually beginning at a young age within the temple schools, sometimes called the pharaohs, or House of Life. Here they would spend years mastering the intricate art of reading and writing hieroglyphs and the faster hieratic script. They would immerse themselves in the vast body of sacred literature hymns to the gods. Mythological tales, complex ritual texts, medical papyri, which often included dream-based diagnoses, and crucially for our focus, collections of dream interpretations or dream books, which listed common dream symbols and their supposed meanings. They learned the subtle art of symbolism, the importance of puns and wordplay, which the Egyptians believed were often embedded in divine messages, and the complex cosmology that explained the workings of their universe and the interactions between gods and mortals. When you, as an anxious dreamer, finally gained an audience with one of these priestly interpreters, the setting itself would contribute to the solemnity and perceived authority of the consultation. It would likely take place within the sacred precincts of a temple, a place of ritual purity set apart from the mundane clamor of daily life. Perhaps you'd be led to a quiet side chamber, the air thick with the scent of incense. Kai-fi may be that complex, fragrant blend used in temple rituals. The priest, clad in pristine white linen, his head perhaps shaven in the priestly manner, would receive you with a calm, dignified demeanor. He was, after all, an intermediary, a conduit between your world and the often overwhelming power of the divine. Forget a comfortable therapist's couch for spilling your subconscious anxieties. You'd more likely be seated on a clean reed mat, respectfully presenting your troubling night vision to a serene individual in a starched kilt, who might just calmly inform you that your dream of being chased by a giant goose wearing Pharaoh's double crown means you urgently need to make a substantial offering of beer and bread to the temple of Geb, the earth god. And you'd probably make a note to do it just in case the divine goose had friends in high places. The priest would listen intently as you recounted your dream, paying close attention to every detail, every symbol, every emotion you experienced. He might ask clarifying questions. What was the color of the snake? Was the river flowing north or south? Did the deceased relative in your dream offer you food or refuse it? These details were not trivial. They could hold the key to the dream's true meaning. He might then consult his own knowledge, his memory of similar dreams and their outcomes, or perhaps even unroll a papyrus scroll, one of those precious dream books, to look up specific symbols. The respect and awe that these priestly interpreters commanded would have been immense. In a society where dreams were taken so seriously, the individuals who could unlock their secrets, who could tell you whether your vision portended joy or sorrow, fortune or disaster, held a position of considerable spiritual and social influence. Their interpretations could guide personal decisions, alleviate crippling anxieties, or confirm hopeful premonitions. Their pronouncements carried the weight of divine sanction, or at least divine insight. A quirky tidbit related to their practice might involve the ritual state of the priest himself. Before undertaking the serious and sacred task of interpreting divine messages, a dream interpreter might have undergone specific purification rituals, perhaps ceremonial washing, anointing with sacred oils, or the recitation of protective prayers. To ensure his own spiritual clarity, his receptiveness to divine inspiration, and his protection from any negative influences that might cling to a particularly ominous dream. He might also wear specific amulets or priestly regalia believed to enhance his connection to the gods of wisdom and revelation. Egyptologists still debate the precise organizational structure and degree of specialization among those priests who engaged in dream interpretation. For instance, whether there were formally recognized guilds or colleges of dream interpreters in all historical periods, how their specific training and initiation might have differed from those of other priestly roles, and the exact extent to which their interpretations were rigorously standardized by surviving dream books versus allowing for more intuitive, inspired, or even individually tailored insights based on the dreamer's specific circumstances. What is certain is that these learned men, these masters of secrets, were the crucial intermediaries in ancient Egypt's ongoing dialogue with the divine through the medium of night visions. They were the decoders, the translators of a sacred, symbolic language, the ones who could lift, however partially, the veil of night and offer a glimpse into the intentions of the gods and the unfolding patterns of fate. Your mysterious dream, once entrusted to their wisdom, was no longer just a confusing jumble of images. It became a text to be read, a map to be navigated, a message to be understood, all thanks to the profound knowledge and sacred authority of these priestly interpreters. The learned priests of ancient Egypt, those masters of secrets, as you now know them with their deep understanding of sacred texts and dream symbolism, were the essential intermediaries for anyone troubled or intrigued by a mysterious night vision. You would bring your jumbled, potent dream to them, and they, with their wisdom and divine connection, would help you unravel its hidden meanings. But what if you didn't just passively wait for a significant dream to arrive unbidden? What if your need for guidance, for healing, or for a direct message from a god was so pressing that you wanted to actively seek out a divine communication in your sleep? Well, for that, the ancient Egyptians had a remarkable practice: temple sleep, or incubation. This wasn't about just finding a comfy spot in the temple courtyard for a quick nap. A mainstream historical fact is that ritual incubation, deliberately sleeping within the sacred precincts of a particular temple or shrine with the express purpose of receiving a divinely inspired dream, was a known practice in ancient Egypt, especially at sanctuaries renowned for healing or oracular pronouncements. The idea was that by placing yourself in direct proximity to the god in their very house, you were more likely to receive a clear, potent, and meaningful vision. Forget a fancy modern sleep clinic with its weighted blankets and white noise machines. If you wanted a truly impactful, medically or spiritually significant dream in ancient Egypt, you might consider booking an overnight stay at the local temple of Imhotep or, in later times, Serapis. The amenities were probably fairly basic, think stone floors rather than memory foam. But the potential for a direct divine consultation during your slumber was considered top tier. Imagine yourself as a supplicant, someone in need. Perhaps you suffer from a persistent illness that no ordinary physician or folk remedy has been able to cure. Or maybe you face an intractable personal problem, a vital decision for which you desperately seek divine guidance. Or you might simply have a profound desire for a closer connection with a particular deity. Your path would lead you to a temple known for its dream oracles or its healing god. Sanctuaries dedicated to the deified sage Imhotep, the brilliant architect and physician from the Old Kingdom, or later in the Greco-Roman period. The Grand Serapeia, dedicated to the syncretic god Serapis, were famous for this practice. But other temples dedicated to gods like Thoth for wisdom, or even Amun for matters of state, might also have had provisions for such sacred slumber. The journey to the temple itself might be part of the ritual of pilgrimage undertaken with a hopeful and reverent heart. Upon arrival, you wouldn't just unroll your reed mat and doze off. There would be preparations, purification rites to ensure you were worthy of entering the god's presence even in sleep. You might be required to undergo ceremonial washing, to abstain from certain foods or activities, perhaps wine or sexual relations for a period beforehand, and to dress in clean, simple linen garments. You would certainly make offerings to the god, perhaps a small loaf of bread, a jar of beer or wine, a fragrant cone of incense, or a specific votive offering related to your plea. These acts demonstrated your piety, your sincerity, and your respect for the divine power you were about to encounter. Then you would be led to the designated sacred sleeping place. This wasn't typically in the main bustling part of the temple, but often in a quieter, more secluded area, perhaps a special building or set of chambers within the temple complex known in later Greek contexts as an abaton, a place not to be trodden by the profane or a place of sleeping. Imagine a dimly lit hall, the air thick with the lingering scent of days, months, even years of incense offering. The silence would be profound, broken only perhaps by the soft chanting of priests in some distant sanctuary, or the rustle of other hopeful dreamers settling down on their mats around you. There would be an almost palpable atmosphere of sanctity, of expectation, of being on the very threshold of the divine. You wouldn't just be setting your alarm clock for the morning. You'd be setting your spiritual intention, purifying your heart, and fervently hoping your resulting dream wasn't just a random replay of that slightly embarrassing incident at the village beer festival last week, but something genuinely useful and divinely inspired from a bona fide God. As you lay down to sleep in this sacred space, your mind would be focused on your problem, your plea, your question to the God. You would offer your prayers, your hopes, your anxieties. And then you would surrender to sleep, trusting that the God would visit you, would speak to you through the vivid imagery and narratives of a dream. The dreams received during incubation were considered particularly potent. Ideally, the God themselves might appear directly, perhaps, offering a diagnosis for an illness and prescribing a specific cure, which could be anything from taking certain herbs to performing a particular ritual, or even something seemingly bizarre like, go and bathe in that sacred pool and you'll be fine. Or the dream might provide a clear answer to your question, a prophetic glimpse of the future, or a piece of unambiguous guidance. Upon waking, often at the crack of dawn, your first and most crucial task would be to remember the dream in as much detail as possible. You would then immediately report it to the temple priests, those learned interpreters we met earlier. They would listen carefully, help you recall any forgotten elements, and then apply their expert knowledge to decipher its meaning and prescribe any necessary actions. The interpretation of an incubation dream was a vital step. The God might have spoken, but it was usually through the priest that the full import of that divine message was made clear and actionable. A quirky and rather touching tidbit that survives from these practices are the numerous votive stelae or plaques that have been found at healing sanctuaries. These were often left by grateful individuals who believed they had been cured or had received vital guidance through temple sleep. They might depict the dreamer, the God who appeared to them, the dream itself in symbolic form, or even the afflicted body part that was healed, all as a public thank you offering and a testament to the deity's miraculous power. It was the ancient Egyptian equivalent of leaving a glowing 5-star review on divinedreaminterventions.com. Egyptologists still debate the complex interplay of factors at work during these temple incubation rituals. To what extent the cures or insights received were the result of genuine, deeply held religious faith and autosuggestion. How much was influenced by the unique, highly charged sensory and psychological environment of the sacred sleeping place, whether there were elements of skillful guidance or even subtle hypnotic suggestion from the priests, or if some temple compounds, particularly those dedicated to healing, also employed more direct, if perhaps unacknowledged, medical or therapeutic interventions, alongside the dream-focused rituals themselves. What is undeniable is that for countless ancient Egyptians, the practice of incubation, this sacred slumber within the god's own house, offered a profound source of hope, a direct line of appeal to the divine for healing guidance and reassurance. It was a testament to their unwavering belief in the accessibility of their gods and the potent, mysterious messages that could be delivered when one dared to sleep on the very threshold of the sacred under the watchful gaze of the Nile's veil of night. The sacred slumber of temple incubation, as you've now imagined, offered a direct pathway for ancient Egyptians to actively seek divine guidance or healing through their night visions, laying their hopes and anxieties at the very threshold of a god's house. But not all dreams were so deliberately solicited. Many, perhaps most, arrived unbidden, mysterious nocturnal tapestries woven from strange symbols and potent emotions. And just as the content of the dream was considered vital, so too was its perceived origin. For the ancient Egyptians, the question of who or what had sent the dream, which particular visitor from beyond had dispatched this ethereal message, was a crucial first step in unraveling its meaning and determining the appropriate response. A mainstream historical fact is that the ancient Egyptians believed dreams could emanate from a rich variety of supernatural sources. At the top of this divine dispatch list, of course, were the great gods and goddesses themselves. Amun-Ra, the king of gods and bringer of light, might send a dream of national importance to Pharaoh. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, writing, and magic, could bestow dreams filled with knowledge solutions to complex problems, or even new ritual incantations. Hathor, the joyful cow-eared goddess of love music and motherhood, might grace a dreamer with visions of happiness, fertility, or artistic inspiration. Osiris, lord of the underworld, could communicate truths about the afterlife or the deceased. And a protective deity like Bes, the fierce but benevolent dwarf god, might send a dream to warn a household of impending danger or to reassure them of his guardianship. It's like your dream inbox wasn't just a random jumble. It could potentially contain direct memos from the celestial CEO that's Ra, by the way, important updates from the Divine Archives courtesy of Thoth, or even a friendly reminder from cosmic HR Hathor, probably telling you to lighten up and enjoy life a bit more. Then there were the Aks, the effective blessed spirits of the deceased ancestors. In Egyptian belief, death was not an absolute end, but a transition, and the Aks of one's relatives, particularly respected parents or grandparents, were thought to retain an interest in the affairs of their living descendants. These ancestral spirits could appear in dreams sometimes, offering guidance based on their accumulated wisdom, sometimes providing comfort or reassurance, and occasionally making requests. Perhaps they felt their tomb offerings were a bit meager lately, or a particular family matter needed attention. A dream visit from a beloved grandmother, even if she was long departed, could be a deeply meaningful and cherished event. But not all visitors from beyond the veil of sleep were necessarily benevolent. The ancient Egyptians also acknowledged the existence of a host of other less predictable and sometimes downright malevolent entities that could intrude upon one's slumbers. These might include restless ghosts of those who had died improperly or unhappily, minor demons, or trickster spirits. These unwelcome nocturnal guests were believed to be capable of sending nightmares, terrifying apparitions, or deceptive dreams designed to lead the dreamer astray, cause them anxiety, or even inflict illness or misfortune. You'd wake up from one of these sweating and heart-pounding, wondering, okay, was that a genuinely helpful tip from a well-meaning ancestral spirit? Or just a really convincing and rather nasty phishing scam from a minor desert demon with a particularly inventive grudge? This is where priestly discernment became absolutely critical. The perceived source of the dream therefore heavily influenced its interpretation and the subsequent actions taken. A dream clearly identified as coming from a major benevolent deity like Isis or Horus would be treated with utmost seriousness and reverence, its commands or advice likely to be followed diligently. A message from an ancestor would be pondered for its wisdom, and any request dutifully considered. But if a dream bore the hallmarks of a malevolent entity, perhaps it was filled with chaotic, terrifying imagery, left the dreamer with a profound sense of unease or defilement, or incited them towards actions contrary to Ma'at. Then the priest's role would shift from simple interpretation to active spiritual defense, prescribing apotropaic rituals, protective amulets, or specific incantations to ward off the evil influence. How did they even begin to determine who the ethereal sender was? Sometimes the dream figure might explicitly identify itself. I am Ra, or your grandfather Neferhotep speaks to you. More often, though, the clues were in the dream's content, its emotional tone, the specific symbols that appeared, or even the circumstances of the dreamer's life at the time. A priest with his deep knowledge of mythology, the attributes of different gods, and the traditional meanings of dream symbols would meticulously analyze these elements. If the dream involved imagery sacred to a particular god, or if its message aligned with that god's known domain, e.g. a dream about writing, or secret knowledge might point to Thoth, then the divine source might seem clear. A quirky and very human tidbit related to this is the practice of sometimes writing letters to the dead. If someone was being troubled by persistent bad dreams or misfortune and suspected a disgruntled ancestor might be the cause, they might inscribe a letter on a pottery bowl or a piece of papyrus, respectfully addressing the deceased relative, outlining their troubles and perhaps politely requesting them to cease their unwelcome nocturnal visitations or to intercede on their behalf with other spirits. It was a direct appeal, a way of trying to manage those cross-realm communications. Egyptologists still debate the precise and often subtle criteria that ancient Egyptian dream interpreters consistently used to confidently differentiate between dreams. They consider to be genuinely divine revelations. From major gods, authentic messages from benevolent ancestral aches, or the potentially deceptive and harmful machinations of hostile supernatural entities, and how much this critical differentiation might have also depended on factors such as the social status, perceived piety, or psychological state of the dreamer, him or herself. What is clear is that for the ancient Egyptian, the dream world was a busy intersection, a place where the paths of gods, spirits, ancestors, and mortals could cross. Every night vision was a potential encounter, a possible message from one of these many visitors from beyond. Discerning the identity and intention of the sender was the first crucial step in understanding the dream's significance, a task that required immense wisdom, deep spiritual insight, and a profound familiarity with the unseen forces that shaped their world. All qualities embodied in the skilled, priestly interpreters who stood ready to guide the dreamer through this mysterious nocturnal landscape. Forget just knowing who liked your latest social media post. The real ancient Egyptian anxiety was knowing who or what had just sent you a direct message in your sleep, and whether their intentions were heavenly or, well, something else entirely. The ancient Egyptians, as you've now come to understand, firmly believed that their dreams could be direct communications from a whole host of divine beings, ancestral spirits, or sometimes less savory nocturnal visitors. Discerning who exactly was on the other end of that dream line was a crucial first step for the priestly interpreters. But once you, the anxious dreamer, and the wise priest had a working theory about whether your night vision was a bona fide message from, say, the great god Thoth, or just a bit of spiritual static from a mischievous minor demon, the next equally vital task was to decode the actual content of the dream itself. What did all those strange, fleeting images, those bizarre scenarios, those potent emotions actually mean? For this, the priests didn't just rely on inspired guesswork or a particularly good cup of morning temple coffee. They had ancient, revered texts to guide them, the papyrus dream keys, or what we today call dream books. Now, these weren't exactly pocket-sized paperbacks with dream interpretation for dummies written on the cover in cheerful hieroglyphs. A mainstream historical fact is that ancient Egyptian priests and scribes compiled and utilized dream books written on papyrus scrolls, the most famous surviving example being the Papyrus Chester Beatty III dating to the New Kingdom around 1200 BCE. These remarkable documents weren't narrative stories about dreams, but rather practical reference manuals, essentially lists of dream omens or scenarios, each followed by a concise interpretation, and crucially, a prognosis, usually a blunt good or bad. Their ancient search engine for, what does it mean when I dream of my teeth falling out while being chased by a hippo wearing a rather fetching blue loincloth, was basically a very long, very fragile, and meticulously inscribed papyrus scroll. And you really hope the priest handling your query had an excellent internal filing system and very gentle hands. Imagine you've brought your particularly puzzling dream to the temple. The priest, after listening intently, might unroll one of these precious scrolls. The text would likely be written in hieratic, the cursive script used for everyday religious and administrative documents, rather than the more formal hieroglyphs you see on temple walls. The structure was often quite straightforward. If a man sees himself in a dream doing X, or if a woman sees herself in a dream seeing Y, then the interpretation would follow, this is good, it means Z will happen, or this is bad, it means U will befall him, her. The interpretations themselves were often based on fascinating principles. One of the most common was wordplay or puns based on the sounds of words in the ancient Egyptian language. For example, if the word for donkey, I, sounded very similar to the word for greatness, or high office, with a slightly different inflection or determinative sign perhaps, then dreaming of a donkey might be interpreted as good. It means you will be promoted to a high position. This reliance on phonetic similarities meant that a direct, literal translation of the dream symbol often wasn't the point. It was about the clever, almost poetic connections that could be made through language. Another key interpretive method was association. The meaning of a dream symbol could be derived from the known characteristics, behaviors, or mythological significance of that object or creature. Dreaming of a cat, for instance, might be considered good because cats were associated with the benevolent goddess Bastet, a protector of homes and women. Conversely, dreaming of a dangerous animal like a snake or a crocodile might often be interpreted as bad, portending danger or treachery, as these creatures were linked to chaotic forces or malevolent deities like Apep, the great serpent of darkness. Though even here context was key, a protective cobra goddess like Wadjet could also appear, making snake dreams a bit more nuanced than a simple eek snake bad. The prognoses, as mentioned, were usually straightforward good, Nefer, or bad, Dihu. This binary classification was often written in red ink to make it stand out clearly, signaling to the dreamer whether they should be relieved or immediately start looking into apotropaic rituals, which we'll get to soon. Some dreams, of course, had very direct, almost literal interpretations. If a man sees himself in a dream eating bread good, it means he will have sustenance. No complex psychoanalysis needed for that one, but others were far more symbolic. A quirky and rather relatable tidbit comes directly from these ancient texts. For instance, the papyrus Chester Beatty III notes, "If a man sees himself in a dream drinking warm beer bad, it means suffering will come upon him." Now, warm beer is arguably a bad experience in any era, so one can only imagine the additional layer of anxiety this interpretation would have added. Or another, if a man sees himself in a dream looking out of a window good, it means his cry, i.e., his prayer or plea will be heard by his God. These offer a fascinating window, if you'll pardon the pun, into their daily concerns and their symbolic understanding of the world. You'd certainly hope your nocturnal visions were filled with pleasant window gazing and refreshingly cool beer, rather than the tepid, suffering-inducing kind. These dream books were the priest's indispensable tools, a repository of accumulated oneirocritic wisdom passed down through generations of temple scribes and interpreters. However, it's unlikely that priests applied these texts in an entirely rigid, mechanical fashion. Their own wisdom, their knowledge of the individual dreamer's circumstances, their understanding of current events, and perhaps even a degree of intuitive insight would all have played a role in selecting the most appropriate interpretation from the book, or in adapting a general meaning to a specific personal context. Egyptologists still debate the precise extent to which these surviving written dream books represented a comprehensive, universally applied canon of dream interpretation that was strictly adhered to by all priestly interpreters across all temples and throughout all periods of Egyptian history, versus the intriguing possibility that they were more like individual scribal compilations, casebooks, reflecting specific temple traditions, regional variations in belief, or even the personal working notes and accumulated experiences of a particularly renowned dream expert or school of thought. Regardless of these nuances, these papyrus dream keys were vital. They provided a framework, a system, a way to bring order and understanding to the often chaotic, fleeting, and deeply personal world of night visions. They allowed the priest to confidently unlock the symbolic language of dreams, to translate what seemed like divine static into clear messages, and to offer the anxious Egyptian dreamer not just an interpretation, but a path forward. Whether that path led to rejoicing or to the urgent performance of rituals designed to ward off an impending dream-foretold doom. Those ancient papyrus dream keys, the revered dream books we explored, were the Egyptian priests' indispensable reference manuals packed with lists of omens and their generally accepted meanings. But interpreting a mysterious night vision wasn't just a simple matter of looking up a symbol in a divine dictionary and calling it a day. Oh no. The true art of the priestly dream. Interpreter the Hari Seshta, or the learned Kari Hebet, lay in their ability to decode the rich, complex, and often deeply nuanced symbolic language that the gods, spirits, or ancestors were believed to employ. It was about understanding the divine symbols, the subtle associations, and the intricate wordplay that could turn a seemingly mundane dream image into a potent message about your future, your health, or your relationship with Ma'at. Imagine you've brought your dream to the temple. Perhaps you dreamt of a journey or an encounter with a specific animal or an unusual event. The priest wouldn't just give you a one-word answer. A mainstream historical fact is that ancient Egyptian dream interpretation involved a careful analysis of a wide vocabulary of symbols drawn from their natural environment, their rich mythology, their religious beliefs, and the realities of their daily lives. The priest acted as a symbolic analyst, drawing upon years of training and a deep cultural understanding to unpack the layers of meaning. So, you dreamt of a giant talking scarab beetle offering you a particularly ripe fig whilst reciting passages from the Book of the Dead. The priest would be like, right, let's break this down. The scarab Khepri, symbol of rebirth in the morning sun, generally auspicious. The fig, often associated with sweetness, sustenance, and fertility, also good. The talking part, suggests a direct message. The Book of the Dead indicates matters of the afterlife or profound transformation. Was the scarab's general tone encouraging or a bit judgy? These details, my friend, are crucial for your overall cosmic weather forecast. Let's consider some common categories of dream imagery and how a priest might best begin to decode them. Animals were incredibly significant. A dream featuring a cat or mouse was usually a very good omen. Cats were beloved for their protective qualities against pests like snakes and scorpions, and they were sacred to the goddess Bastet, a benevolent deity associated with home fertility and protection. So, a purring cat in your dream, probably a thumbs up from the divine realm. Snakes, however, were a bit more complicated. A lurking venomous viper might symbolize an enemy treachery, or the forces of chaos embodied by the great serpent Apep. But a rearing cobra, the uraeus seen on Pharaoh's crown, was a symbol of royal power and divine protection, associated with goddesses like Wadjet or Meretseger. So the type of snake and its behavior were key. Dreaming of cattle, those all-important providers of wealth and sustenance, was often a potent sign. Fat, healthy cows, much like in the famous biblical story, involving a pharaoh, generally signified abundance and prosperity. Lean, sickly cows, not so much. Birds too carried heavy symbolism. A falcon might represent the god Horus, a message of kingship or victory. An ibis could point to Thoth bringing wisdom or a need for careful record-keeping. A vulture might symbolize Nekhbet, the protective goddess of Upper Egypt. Actions within the dream were equally important. If you dreamt of eating pleasant foods, fresh bread, sweet dates, good quality beer, or milk, this was generally seen as auspicious, signifying satisfaction, abundance, and the enjoyment of life's offerings. But as you might recall from that rather specific warning about warm beer consuming foul or unpleasant substances in a dream, like dirt excrement or that dreaded tepid ale, was a very bad sign, often portending suffering, illness, or misfortune. Flying or ascending to the sky was usually a positive omen, suggesting you might overcome obstacles, achieve a higher status, or even commune with the gods. Falling, conversely, was a clear warning of failure, a loss of position, or impending danger. Crossing a body of water like the Nile could symbolize a transition, a journey to a new phase of life, or even in some contexts, the journey into the Duat, the underworld. The state of the water, clear and calm versus dark and turbulent, would significantly alter the interpretation. Objects seen in dreams also held specific meanings. Bread and beer, the staples of the Egyptian diet, appearing in a dream were generally good, promising sustenance. Clean white linen clothing signified purity, good fortune, or a positive outcome. Torn or dirty garments, however, could mean sorrow or disgrace. Tools might relate to your profession or a task you needed to undertake. Weapons could signify conflict, but also protection or the assertion of authority. And then there were the people you encountered. Dreaming of a god or goddess appearing to you was, of course, highly significant. Their demeanor, their words, and any objects they carried or offered would be meticulously analyzed. Seeing a deceased relative, as we've touched upon, could be a message from the afterlife, a request for offerings, or a word of guidance. Dreaming of foreigners might indicate travel contact with other lands, or sometimes a warning about potential enemies or disruptive outside influences. A quirky and rather specific tidbit is how the color of an animal or object in a dream could sometimes as dramatically alter its meaning. For instance, while many animals had their set associations, a white animal appearing in a dream was often seen as particularly pure, auspicious, and divinely favored. A black animal, unless it was specifically associated with a benevolent chthonic deity like Osiris, often depicted with black or green skin, symbolizing fertility and rebirth, or a god of the fertile Black Nile silt, like Min, might carry more ominous connotations, perhaps hinting at darkness, danger, or matters related to the underworld. The priest wouldn't just look at one symbol in isolation. He would consider the entire narrative of the dream, the interplay of different images, the dreamer's own emotional state during the dream and upon waking, and their current life circumstances. Was the dreamer a farmer, worried about his crops, a noble concerned about court intrigue, or a woman hoping for a child? All this context would be factored into the final interpretation. It was like ancient Egyptian symbolic Pictionary. But if you or the priest guessed the divine drawing incorrectly, you didn't just lose a round. You might accidentally misinterpret a vital celestial memo and miss out on a crucial blessing, or fail to avert a foretold calamity. No pressure at all. Egyptologists still debate the precise balance and methodology employed by individual priestly dream interpreters. How much their analyses were strictly governed by the somewhat rigid codified meanings found in the surviving dream book, papyri, versus the degree to which they incorporated more intuitive psychological insights into the dreamer's personal life, their anxieties and aspirations, or even local folklore and specific temple traditions, especially when faced with ambiguous novel or particularly complex dream imagery not explicitly covered in their textual guides. What is clear is that these priests were skilled decoders of a deeply ingrained cultural and religious symbolic system. They understood the divine shorthand, the sacred puns, the mythological allusions that permeated ancient Egyptian thought. Their ability to navigate this complex lexicon of night visions, to translate the often surreal and fleeting imagery of dreams into coherent and actionable guidance, was a vital service, a sacred skill that helped countless individuals try to make sense of the mysterious messages that emerged when the Nile and its people were veiled in the quiet mystery of night. The ancient Egyptian priest, your trusted guide through the nocturnal labyrinth of dreams, has meticulously listened to your recounted vision. He has pondered the strange parade of animals, the peculiar actions, the significant objects, perhaps even consulted those revered. Papyrus dream keys filled with generations of interpretive wisdom weighing the puns, the associations, the colors, and the context. Now you sit before him, heart perhaps thumping like a temple drum, awaiting the crucial synthesis, the bottom line. The answer to the question that has been burning in your mind since you woke: was this night vision a harbinger of fortune or a dark premonition of misfortune to come? This moment, the priest's pronouncement of the dream's overall omen, was a pivotal one. A mainstream historical fact clearly evident in surviving dream interpretation texts like the Papyrus Chester Beatty III is that dreams were very often definitively classified with a binary prognosis: good, Nefer, or bad, DGU. This wasn't usually a vague, well, it could mean this, or perhaps that, let's see how things pan out. The priest's role, after his careful analysis, was to deliver a clear verdict. This clarity, even if the news was unwelcome, was what the anxious dreamer sought. It transformed the chaotic, often unsettling ambiguity of the dream into something understandable, something that could potentially be acted upon. The priest was in essence your ancient Egyptian spiritual magic 8-ball, but with considerably more elaborate robes, a deeper understanding of divine bureaucracy, and a much higher consultation fee, probably payable in fine linen or a pot of good honey. Outlook not so good, he might say, or signs point to yes. You will get that promotion to assistant overseer of royal geese. Imagine first the relief, the sheer, unadulterated joy. If the priest, after thoughtful consideration, looks up, perhaps a gentle smile touching his lips, and declares your dream good. You dreamt of drinking cool, sweet milk under a flowering sycamore tree, he might say. Nefer. This is good. It means abundance will come to your household. Your children will be healthy, and the goddess Hathor looks upon you with favor. A wave of warmth would wash over you. The anxieties that had gnawed at you since waking would dissipate like morning mist on the Nile. You might offer a spontaneous prayer of thanks to the god who sent such a happy portent. The priest would likely then advise you on how to ensure this good fortune, manifested perhaps by making specific offerings of gratitude at the temple or by continuing your pious observances and living in accordance with Ma'at. Getting a good dream interpretation was probably like finding an unexpected oasis in the desert or discovering your entire field of barley had ripened perfectly overnight, a cause for celebration and a reaffirmation of divine benevolence. But what if the priest's expression remained grave? What if after consulting the scrolls or his own deep well of knowledge, he delivered a different, more somber verdict? You say you dreamt of your teeth falling out while a red serpent coiled around your leg. His voice might be low serious. Jew, this is bad. It signifies that a powerful enemy may be plotting against you, or that a member of your household will fall gravely ill. The blood would drain from your face. The vague unease your dream had provoked would now crystallize into a very real, very potent fear. This was not just a bad night's sleep. This was a divine warning, a glimpse of potential suffering on the horizon. Getting a bad dream prognosis. That was like the celestial equivalent of receiving an overdue tax bill from Thoth himself, stamped with a rather ominous-looking ankh of displeasure and with a high probability of a follow-up visit from a minor deity specializing in inconvenient boils. The manner in which the priest delivered such unwelcome news was crucial. A skilled interpreter would likely do so with a degree of compassion, but also with an unwavering seriousness that underscored the gravity of the divine message. He wouldn't necessarily leave you in a state of utter despair, however. For even the most ominous dreams, there was often a "what next?" And that "what next" usually involved ritual action, which we will explore more fully soon. The interpretation of a bad dream was not just a sentence of doom. It was also critically the first step towards potentially averting that doom. A quirky tidbit might involve specific ritual phrases or gestures the priest employed when delivering the prognosis, perhaps to either amplify the sanctity of a good omen, or to ritually contain or begin the process of deflecting a bad one. For example, upon declaring a dream good, he might touch an ankh amulet or make a gesture of offering towards a temple statue. If the dream was bad, he might immediately recite a short protective incantation or make a gesture of warding off evil even before advising you on the full apotropaic rituals required. It's also quite plausible that dreamers, upon hearing the interpretation, whether good or ill, were expected to make a small immediate offering. Perhaps a libation of cool water poured onto the earth, or a pinch of incense thrown onto a nearby brazier, as an acknowledgement of the divine communication they had received and the priest's skilled assistance in deciphering it. While the dream books often present these binary good or bad outcomes, it's important to remember that a truly wise priest would also consider nuances. Perhaps a dream had both positive and negative elements, or maybe a seemingly bad omen could be mitigated if certain conditions were met or certain actions avoided. The interpretation might be conditional. This dream indicates a challenge ahead, but if you act with piety and make the proper offerings to Sobek, you may yet overcome it. This offered a degree of agency to the dreamer, a sense that their fate was not entirely sealed by the nocturnal vision alone. Egyptologists still debate how much the priest's ultimate pronouncements of a dream being good or bad were rigidly determined by the textual precedents found in the dream books versus the degree to which they might have been subtly tailored or framed, based on their intuitive understanding of the dreamer's psychological state. Their known social circumstances, or even a desire to offer comfort, inspire appropriate action, or perhaps gently guide behavior in a way that upheld communal well-being, especially when dealing with particularly vulnerable or influential individuals. Regardless of these subtleties, the moment the priest delivered his verdict, fortune or misfortune foretold Wepat, was a profound one for you, the ancient Egyptian dreamer. His words, believed to be an unlocking of divine will, would shape your emotions, your anxieties, your hopes, and very often your immediate course of action. You'd be hanging on his every syllable. So esteemed master of secrets might dream of 7 baboons joyfully weaving a rather fetching linen shawl while reciting the king's titulary backwards. Is that a "your linen business will inexplicably prosper" kind of good? Or a "prepare for some serious bureaucratic entanglement involving primates" kind of bad? The suspense you can imagine would be almost unbearable. The priest has spoken. His careful analysis of your troubling night vision, with its disquieting symbols and unsettling emotional residue, has culminated in a solemn verdict: Jew. Bad. The dream, he explains, portends some misfortune, some looming difficulty, some displeasure from the divine realm that requires your urgent attention. Your heart sinks. The vague anxiety your dream induced now feels like a heavy stone in your stomach. But in ancient Egypt, a land where the gods were ever present and magic was a tangible force, a negative dream prognosis was rarely just a passive sentence of doom. No, it was more often a diagnosis, and with that diagnosis came a prescribed course of treatment, a series of apotropaic rituals, potent spells, and specific offerings designed to avert night's dark omens and steer you back toward the path of safety and Ma'at. The ancient Egyptians, you see, were firm believers in the power of human action, guided by priestly wisdom and divine favor to influence their destiny. A mainstream historical fact is that they employed a rich and varied repertoire of apotropic, literally evil-averting magic and ritual practices, specifically to counteract the negative portents revealed in bad dreams. If a god had sent a warning, it was often seen as an invitation to make amends, to purify oneself, or to actively seek protection. Your priest, having delivered the unwelcome news, would now shift from interpreter to spiritual physician, prescribing the necessary remedies to nullify the dream's harmful influence. So your dream foretold an unfortunate encounter with, say, a particularly grumpy river deity or a plague of unusually aggressive sacred ibises. Not to worry, or at least not to despair entirely. The priest likely had a detailed multi-step plan involving some very specific sacred chants, an offering of exceptionally good quality bread and beer, and possibly a strongly worded ritually inscribed letter of apology to the concerned ibis deity. One of the first lines of defense would often be the recitation of powerful spells or incantations. The priests of Ha, particularly the Kari Hebet or lector priests, were masters of these sacred words, many of which were recorded in religious texts, some of which we now refer to as parts of the Book of the Dead, or in specific compendia like a book for banishing an evil dream. These weren't just pretty poems. They were believed to be magically effective formulae, utterances imbued with divine power, Heka capable of repelling hostile forces, placating angered deities, or creating a protective shield around you, the dreamer. The priest might recite these spells over you or instruct you to repeat them yourself at specific times, perhaps facing a certain direction or holding a particular sacred object. Offerings were almost invariably part of the prescription. If your bad dream was interpreted as a sign of a god's displeasure, you would be advised to make propitiatory offerings at their temple or local shrine. This might involve gifts of bread, beer, wine, incense, linen, or perhaps a small animal sacrifice like a goose or a goat depending on the deity and the perceived severity of the offense or warning. The sweet smoke of incense rising from the altar. The presentation of fine food and drink. These were tangible ways to soothe divine anger, to show your piety and remorse, and to request renewed favor and protection. Purification rituals were also common. The negative energy or spiritual contamination associated with a bad dream needed to be washed away. The priest might prescribe ceremonial washing with water infused with natron, a naturally occurring salt with cleansing properties or specific sacred herbs. You might be fumigated with incense, known for its purifying qualities, or anointed with consecrated oils. The aim was to render you ritually clean, thereby making you less vulnerable to the misfortune foretold in the dream. Their version of contreplaisir for a particularly nasty dream omen was considerably more involved than a simple keyboard shortcut, usually requiring a good deal of incense. Some very specific hand gestures performed by a trained professional, and a sincere effort on your part not to accidentally summon something even worse during the banishing process. Then there were the more symbolic, almost performative actions designed to transfer or neutralize the dream's evil. A quirky and rather fascinating tidbit is the ancient Egyptian practice of externalizing a bad dream. For instance, a priest might instruct you to recount your nightmare in detail to a freshly cut reed, or a clump of papyrus growing by the riverbank. Then that plant, now believed to have absorbed the dream's negative power, would be ritually destroyed, perhaps by being burned or thrown into the Nile, thus symbolically carrying the misfortune away from you. Another, even more direct method was reportedly to write down the bad dream on a fresh piece of papyrus, then dip this papyrus into a pot of beer, and finally, to actually drink the beer, thereby consuming and neutralizing the dream's harmful essence within your own ritually fortified body. It gives a whole new meaning to eating your words, or in this case, your nightmares. Protective amulets. Those ubiquitous charms you've already encountered would also play a key role. The priest might recommend you acquire and wear a specific new amulet known for its power against the particular type of evil portended by your dream. Or he might perform rituals to recharge or reconsecrate the amulets you already possessed, bolstering their protective energies. An Eye of Horus. For general protection, a best amulet against night terrors, a scarab for renewal. The right amulet properly activated was a vital piece of your spiritual armor. Egyptologists still debate the precise perceived efficacy and underlying psychological mechanisms of these diverse apotropaic dream rituals. For instance, whether the ancient Egyptians believed these practices could directly and literally alter a divinely decreed future outcome, or if their primary power lay more in their profound ability to alleviate the dreamer's acute anxiety, reinforce their sense of personal agency and control in the face of perceived threats, and ensure that the individual ritually realigned themselves with the principles of Mayat through these demonstrative acts of piety and purification. Regardless of the precise theological or psychological interpretation for you, The ancient Egyptian who had just received a disturbing prognostication based on your night vision? These prescribed rituals were not mere superstitions. They were essential, practical, and deeply comforting actions. They transformed you from a passive victim of a frightening omen into an active participant in your own spiritual defense. By meticulously following the priest's instructions, by making the offerings reciting the spells, and undergoing the purifications, you were doing everything in your power to avert the threatened misfortune, to restore your peace of mind, and to walk once more in safety and harmony under the watchful eyes of your gods. Forget just trying to sleep it off after a particularly vivid nightmare. In ancient Egypt, you'd be up at dawn actively and diligently ritualing it off with the expert guidance of your local priest firmly telling that bad dream, "Be gone, foul portent," and take your foreshadowed swarm of divinely disgruntled locusts with you. The apotropaic rituals you've just witnessed in your mind's eye, the spells, the offerings, the symbolic acts of cleansing and transference, were the ancient Egyptians' primary line of defense when their night visions delivered a forecast of doom and gloom. These practices, guided by the temple priests, offered a way to confront fear, to actively engage with the perceived threat, and hopefully to steer fate back onto a more auspicious path. But what if the dreamer wasn't just an ordinary farmer worried about his barley crop, or a craftsman anxious about a business venture? What if the one whose sleep was visited by potent, mysterious visions was none other than Pharaoh himself, the divine king, the living Horus, the shepherd of his people? Well then, the stakes of dream interpretation were raised to an entirely different kingdom-shaking level. You see, Pharaoh was not just a political ruler. He was the central pivot upon which the entire cosmic and earthly order of Egypt rested. His unique and intimate connection with the gods meant that his dreams were considered exceptionally significant. Direct communiques from the divine realm concerning not just his personal well-being, but the welfare, stability, and destiny of the entire land of Kemet. A mainstream historical fact is that the dreams of the pharaoh in ancient Egypt were treated as matters of profound state importance. Royal inscriptions and historical accounts, though sometimes couched in propagandistic language, record instances where a pharaoh's dream and its subsequent interpretation by his most trusted priestly advisors directly led to significant actions such as the initiation of major construction or restoration projects, decisions regarding military campaigns, or the implementation of new religious policies. If Pharaoh had a particularly vivid or troubling dream, it wasn't just a case of, "Oh dear, I dreamt I misplaced my royal scepter in a rather large pile of papyrus tax returns." It was more like, "Summon the high priest of Amun-Ra, immediately alert the vizier, contact the chief lector priest. The great god Ptah appeared to me in a vision, looking distinctly unimpressed with the current state of his temple at Memphis, and we need to figure out pronto if that means he desires a new gold leaf overlay for his sacred bark, or if he's subtly hinting at an impending shortage of high-quality offering incense throughout the two lands." The interpretation of these royal night visions was a task entrusted only to the most learned, most experienced, and most politically astute priests in the land. These would be the high priests of major cults, senior lector priests attached to the royal court, or perhaps those hairy seshta, the masters of secrets renowned for their deep esoteric knowledge. The pressure on these individuals would have been immense. A correct interpretation, one that led to a successful outcome or was seen to align with divine will, could bring great favor and reward. But a misinterpretation, especially one that resulted in a failed policy, a military defeat, or heaven forbid, seemed to contradict a later, clearer divine sign, could have catastrophic consequences. Not just for the kingdom, but very personally for the priest who had offered the faulty counsel. Interpreting Pharaoh's dreams, arguably the ultimate high-pressure ancient Egyptian career path. Get it right, and you might find yourself showered with gold collars and prime cuts of temple offerings. Get it spectacularly wrong, and, well, let's just say your prospects for a peaceful retirement, tending a small fig orchard, might diminish rather rapidly. One of the most famous examples of a royal dream shaping monumental action is recorded on the dream stele of Pharaoh Thutmose IV from the 18th dynasty of the New Kingdom. As a young prince before he became pharaoh, Thutmose reportedly went hunting in the desert near Giza. Resting in the shadow of the Great Sphinx, which was at that time largely buried in sand up to its neck, he fell asleep. In his dream, the sun god Ra-Horakhti embodied in the Sphinx appeared to him and promised him the throne of Egypt if he would clear away the sand that was choking the great monument. Upon becoming Pharaoh Thutmose IV, did exactly that, excavating the Sphinx and erecting a commemorative stele between its paws to recount this divine dream promise, and his fulfillment of it thereby legitimizing his rule and honoring the god. While such grand publicly recorded dreams often served to reinforce royal ideology, you can imagine the more private, perhaps more anxious consultations that must have occurred within the palace walls when Pharaoh awoke from a particularly ambiguous or unsettling vision. The priests would be summoned perhaps to the royal bedchamber itself or to a private shrine. The dream would be recounted in meticulous detail. The priests would then employ all their knowledge of dream books, of symbolic meanings of mythology, and of the current political and religious climate to arrive at an interpretation that was both true or at least plausible to the divine message, and ideally acceptable and actionable for their royal master. A quirky and entirely understandable tidbit would be the immense level of discretion and careful phrasing that must have surrounded the interpretation of a potentially negative or challenging royal dream. How do you tell the living embodiment of Horus, the all-powerful king, that his dream foretells a possible famine or a threat from a foreign enemy, or even that a god is displeased with one of his policies without causing undue royal alarm, or worse, royal anger, directed at you? The messenger, it would have required extraordinary diplomatic skill. Couching the interpretation in respectful, allegorical language and always emphasizing Pharaoh's unique ability with the god's help to overcome any adversity. The rituals surrounding a royal dream, especially a significant or troubling one, would likely have been far more elaborate than those for an ordinary citizen. Offerings would be made in the great state temples, complex. Purification rites might be performed for Pharaoh in the palace, and perhaps specific festivals or ceremonies would be decreed to appease the gods or to garner their support for a course of action revealed in the dream. Egyptologists still debate the precise interplay and authenticity of recorded royal dreams. To what extent they represented genuine, deeply felt visionary experiences of the pharaohs themselves versus being carefully constructed and strategically interpreted narratives crafted by the court scribes and priesthood to serve as powerful religious and political propaganda, designed to legitimize specific royal policies, reinforce the king's divine mandate and intimate connection with the gods, or to explain and sanctify major state undertakings like wars or massive building programs to the wider populace and the elite. Whatever the balance between personal vision and political expediency, it's clear that when Pharaoh dreamed, the entire kingdom, in a sense, held its breath. His night visions were not his alone. They were seen as carrying the weight of Egypt's destiny. And the priests, those keepers of sacred knowledge and interpreters of divine symbols, stood as the crucial, if sometimes trembling, intermediaries tasked with translating those enigmatic nocturnal messages from the gods into guidance that could shape the fate of millions, all under the watchful and often demanding eyes of their divine king. You thought your boss paid incredibly close attention to your quarterly projection reports? Imagine if your boss was Pharaoh, his gods sent him performance reviews and strategic plans directly in his sleep, and you were the one who had to decipher the divine feedback and present it coherently at the next morning's Nile-side strategy meeting. Talk about a tough audience. The dreams of Pharaoh, as you've now come to understand, were affairs of state celestial communiques that could shift the tides of war, inspire monumental building projects, and reaffirm the divine mandate of the king. The interpretations offered by the highest priests in the land carried immense weight, shaping the destiny of the two lands. But what about you, the ordinary Egyptian? You, the farmer tilling your modest plot by the Nile's grace. The craftsman in a bustling village workshop, the woman managing a household and hoping for healthy children. Did your night visions, your more personal anxieties and hopes that surfaced in sleep, also command attention? Absolutely. For the ancient Egyptians, the gods and spirits spoke to everyone, and the dreams of a peasant, while perhaps not influencing international policy, were no less vital to their own life, their family's well-being, and their personal sense of harmony with Ma'at. So, leaving the rarefied air of the royal court and its weighty dream interpretations, you now find yourself back among the everyday folk in the sun-baked villages and crowded town quarters. And here the dreams are often woven from the very fabric of daily existence. a mainstream historical fact clearly supported by surviving ancient Egyptian dream books like the Papyrus Chester Beatty III and numerous inscribed ostraca, is that a great many recorded dream interpretations relate directly to the common concerns of ordinary people. These texts are filled with omens about agriculture, family life, health, social relationships, and small-scale economic fortunes or misfortunes. It seems that even if you weren't dreaming of commanding armies or building vast new temple complexes, your vision of, say, whether your prize milking cow is about to start giving sour milk, or even better spontaneously learn to recite flattering poetry in your honor, still warranted serious consideration and perhaps a consultation with someone in the know. Imagine you are a farmer. Your entire livelihood, your family's sustenance depends on the bounty of the Nile and the success of your crops. Your dreams would naturally be filled with potent agricultural symbolism. Dreaming of a field of ripe golden barley Nefer, the local dream interpreter or wise elder might declare. Good, it means abundance and a successful harvest are coming your way. But what if you dreamt of your fields being parched and barren, or of locusts devouring your precious emmer wheat jubad? This could portend a poor harvest, a struggle to pay your taxes, or a season of hunger. Such an interpretation would send a shiver of anxiety down your spine and likely spur you to make offerings to Renenutet, the cobra goddess of the harvest, or to Min, the god of fertility, hoping to appease them and ensure their blessings. Forget worrying about your modern stock portfolio taking a dive. The ancient Egyptian peasant was far more likely to be losing sleep over whether their dream of a particularly grumpy-looking donkey refusing to pull the plow was a sign of impending agricultural doom, or just that the donkey itself was having an existential crisis. Family matters too loomed large in the dreamscape of commoners. A woman longing for a child might dream of finding a scarab beetle, a potent symbol of rebirth and creation, and joyfully take it to the priest, hoping for an auspicious interpretation regarding fertility. Dreams of seeing one's spouse happy and healthy were, of course, good omens. But a dream of a loved one appearing sick or in distress would cause immediate concern. I dreamt my husband was lost in the reeds by the river, and a crocodile lurked nearby. You might anxiously tell the interpreter. The priest, after consulting his knowledge, might reassure you that it simply means your husband will overcome a minor obstacle at work. Or he might gravely advise specific protective rituals if the omen seemed more sinister. Health was another constant preoccupation. Dreams involving specific parts of your body or visions of illness or healing were taken very seriously. Dreaming of clear flowing water might be interpreted as a sign of purification and returning health. Dreaming of consuming something foul or seeing yourself with a festering wound, however, would be a clear warning to seek out healing remedies, perhaps through temple incubation as we discussed, or by making offerings to a healing deity like Sekhmet, the powerful lioness goddess who could both bring and avert plagues. Their version of Googling your symptoms after a strange dream about, say, your liver suddenly developing a taste for singing popular Nile-side shanties was to hurry to the temple and ask a professional if this meant you were about to become a famous musician, or if you just really needed to lay off the fermented date wine for a while. Even small social interactions and minor economic fortunes found their way into dream interpretations. Dreaming of receiving a gift of bread or beer. Good, it means satisfaction and provision. Dreaming of arguing with a neighbor. Bad, it might mean a real dispute is brewing, and you should perhaps make a gesture of goodwill. A quirky tidbit from some dream text is the interpretation of very specific, seemingly minor, everyday occurrences. For example, dreaming of seeing a bald man could be interpreted as a good sign, meaning you will have a victory over your enemies, perhaps because baldness was associated with priests or revered figures, or because an enemy's head being bare implied their defeat. Or dreaming of catching many fish in a net. Excellent, that meant joy and abundance were on their way. The accessibility of formal priestly dream interpretation for every single peasant with a puzzling dream is something Egyptologists still debate. While major temples certainly had highly trained priests, it's likely that in smaller villages or more remote communities, ordinary people might also have relied on local wise women or knowing men, individuals respected for their folk wisdom, their understanding of common dream symbols passed down through oral tradition, or perhaps their own intuitive gifts to get a basic reading of their night visions. And, as we've touched upon, there were certainly simple, everyday apotropaic rituals or beliefs that anyone could employ for minor bad dreams, without necessarily needing a full priestly consultation, like the aforementioned practice of not speaking of a bad dream until after sunrise or whispering it to a reed to let the wind carry it away. But for dreams that felt particularly potent, deeply unsettling, or potentially life-altering, the desire for an authoritative interpretation from someone connected to the temple, someone with access to the sacred texts and the esoteric knowledge, would have been strong. Even if it meant offering a portion of your scarce resources, a few cakes of bread, a small jar of beer, a bundle of fresh vegetables, as a payment or gift to the priest for his time and wisdom. Because for the ancient Egyptian commoner, just as for the pharaoh, their dreams were a vital, if sometimes perplexing, window onto the will of the gods and the unfolding pattern of their lives. Understanding those fleeting, mysterious messages from the Nile's veil of night was essential for navigating their world with a sense of hope, for averting potential disaster, and for striving to live in accordance with Ma'at day by anxious or joyful day. The peasants' anxious visions, those everyday dreams of harvests and health of family and small fortunes, as you've now come to appreciate, were taken just as seriously by the ancient Egyptians as the grand kingdom-shaping dreams of Pharaoh. The desire to understand these nocturnal messages, to glean some insight into divine will or future happenings, was a universal human need that transcended social status. But accessing the specialized knowledge of a temple priest, that learned master of secrets who could decode the symbolic language of your slumber, wasn't always a matter of simply walking in and asking for a free consultation. In ancient Egypt, as in many societies where religious services are provided by a dedicated priestly class, there was often an expectation of reciprocity, a system of offerings made in exchange for or in gratitude for that precious divine insight. You see, the entire Egyptian worldview was built upon the concept of ma'at, that cosmic balance and order, which required a constant flowing exchange of energies and actions. Just as the gods provided life, fertility, and protection to humanity, so too were humans expected to honor and sustain the gods and their earthly representatives, the priests and temples, through worship, piety, and very practically through material offerings. A mainstream historical fact is that access to most religious services provided by ancient Egyptian temples and their priests, including not just grand ceremonies, but also more personal rites like dream interpretation, healing rituals, or divinations, typically involved some form of reciprocal exchange. Supplicants were generally expected to make offerings of food, drink valuable goods, or sometimes even their labor, both as a pious gesture to the deity whose favor or wisdom was being sought, and as a way to support the temple institution and its dedicated personnel. Their divine consultation service, you might say, wasn't usually covered by a universal heavenly healthcare plan. You typically had to bring a co-payment, often in the form of a few freshly baked loaves of bread, a jug of good beer, or perhaps a nicely fattened offering goose. So, if you, as an ordinary farmer or artisan, had a particularly troubling dream that you felt compelled to bring before a priest for interpretation, you would likely prepare an appropriate offering to present. This wouldn't necessarily be a rigidly fixed fee, especially for common folk. The nature and size of the offering would often depend on your means, local custom, and perhaps the perceived importance or urgency of your request. For a humble villager, this might mean a portion of their recent harvest, a basket of dates, some onions or lentils, a measure of barley. An artisan might offer a small piece of their craft, a simple pottery vessel, a neatly woven reed mat, or a carved wooden amulet. Even a very poor individual might offer what little they had, perhaps a few fresh eggs, a libation of water poured respectfully, or if they had no material goods to spare, they might even pledge a day or two of their labor to the temple, perhaps helping to clean the courtyards, tend the temple gardens, or assist in some minor repair work. These offerings weren't just a cynical payment for services rendered. They were imbued with religious significance. They were a tangible expression of your respect for the god, your acknowledgement of the priest's sacred role, and your hope for a favorable intervention or a clear understanding of the divine message. The act of giving created a bond, a connection between you, the priest, and the deity whose wisdom you sought. And this reciprocity often extended beyond the initial consultation. If the priest successfully interpreted your dream, especially if it was a bad omen that was then averted through prescribed rituals, or a good omen that subsequently came to pass, a more substantial thank offering would often be made. This was a way of showing gratitude to the god for their guidance or protection, and also no doubt a way of ensuring the continued goodwill of both the deity and their priestly interpreter for any future nocturnal perplexities. You couldn't just leave a glowing 5-star review on Temple Advisor. Calm for your dream priest, after he successfully decoded your nightmare about a hippo demanding your tax receipts. A more tangible and traditionally appreciated thank you, perhaps in the form of a nice pot of honey or a bolt of decent linen, was generally the preferred method of demonstrating your satisfaction and piety. This system of offerings was also vital for the temple economy. As you know, major temples were vast institutions, almost like self-contained towns, with their own agricultural lands, workshops, and a large staff of priests, scribes, artisans, and laborers. The daily offerings brought by supplicants for all manner of religious services, from grand festivals to personal consultations, like dream interpretations, contributed significantly to the sustenance of these temple communities and the upkeep of their magnificent buildings. So when you offered your basket of figs for an interpretation, you weren't just hoping for insight. You were also, in a small way, contributing to the very infrastructure that made such priestly services possible. Forget a simple freemium model for accessing divine dream interpretation. If you wanted the pro features like understanding exactly why you dreamt you were cheerfully flying over the pyramids on the back of a giant turquoise-colored scarab beetle, an offering was generally expected. There were no divine ad-supported versions to unlock here. A quirky and rather charming tidbit is the idea that certain types of offerings might have been considered particularly pleasing or effective when seeking insight into dreams, or when making offerings to specific deities known for their connection to wisdom, magic, or the night. For instance, if you were seeking an interpretation from a priest of Thoth, the god of scribes and wisdom, an offering of a small roll of fresh papyrus, a new reed pen, or a pot of good quality ink might have been seen as an especially thoughtful and appropriate gift. Or if your dream involved Hathor, perhaps an offering of milk honey or fragrant flowers would be considered most suitable. Egyptologists still debate the precise economic structures of the myriad temples across Egypt, from the grand state institutions to smaller local shrines, and the extent to which dream interpretation and other personalized religious services for commoners were formally priced, with set offering requirements, or if the nature, quantity, and perceived value of the offerings were more often flexibly determined by a combination of the supplicant's individual economic means. Established local custom, the priest's assessment of the dream's complexity or importance, and the urgency of the divine insight being sought. What is clear is that the path to understanding your mysterious night visions in ancient Egypt usually involved this principle of sacred exchange. The priests offered their learning, their ritual expertise, and their perceived connection to the divine. You, the dreamer, offered your respect, your piety, and a material token of your sincerity. It was a system that reinforced the interconnectedness of all things, the human and the divine, the material and the spiritual, ensuring that the valuable service of unraveling the secrets of the night was sustained not by chance, but by a continuous reciprocal flow of offerings, given in hope and insights received in sacred trust. The system, as you've now come to see, was well established. You, the ancient Egyptian dreamer, troubled or elated by your night vision, would make your way to the temple, present your offerings, and lay your enigmatic dream before a learned priest. He, with his sacred scrolls and deep understanding of divine symbolism, would then unlock its secrets, telling you whether fortune or misfortune lay ahead, and what rituals might be needed to secure a blessing or avert a disaster. It was a path well trodden, a cornerstone of spiritual life along the Nile. But as you ponder this ancient reverence for priestly dream readings, a little whisper of a question might surface in your mind. Was this faith always absolute? Did skepticism, even in its quietest forms, ever touch this sacred practice? Now it's important to state up front that the vast majority of evidence we have from ancient Egypt, the religious texts, the temple inscriptions, the personal letters, the votive offerings, points overwhelmingly towards a deeply ingrained societal belief in the power of dreams as divine messages, and in the authority of priests as their legitimate interpreters. This was not a fringe belief, it was a fundamental aspect of their worldview, shared from pharaoh down to the humblest farmer. The gods spoke, and dreams were one of their primary communication channels. To ignore a dream, especially a potent one, was to risk ignoring the gods themselves. However, human nature in any era possesses a certain capacity for questioning, for a pragmatic assessment of results. Even in a society as steeped in religious faith as ancient Egypt, it's plausible, even probable, that not every single interpretation was met with uncritical, unwavering acceptance by every single individual. Imagine, for instance, you've had a particularly troubling dream. You make your offerings, you consult the priest, and he gives you an interpretation that seems, well, a bit off, or perhaps one that predicts a misfortune that, despite all prescribed rituals, still comes to pass. Or conversely, a dream interpreted as a great blessing fails to materialize. Might not a tiny seed of doubt, a whisper of skepticism begin to sprout in your mind? If not about the gods themselves, then perhaps about the skill, or even the sincerity, of that particular interpreter. You have to wonder if, after a priest confidently told a hopeful farmer that his dream of a three-headed beer-brewing goose meant he was about to triple his barley harvest, and then an actual biblical-style plague of perfectly ordinary non-brewing geese descended and ate his entire field, the farmer didn't at least quietly think to himself, perhaps that particular interpretation needed a second opinion, or possibly just a much better scarecrow. A mainstream historical fact is that while direct textual evidence of widespread overt skepticism towards priestly dream interpretation in ancient Egypt is scarce as openly questioning, such a sacred practice would have been risky. The very existence of multiple dream books with sometimes slightly varying interpretations, and the known human tendency towards seeking confirmation or relief from anxiety, suggests that individuals might have at times held private reservations or even sought out different opinions if an initial interpretation felt profoundly wrong or overly dire. What might fuel such whispers of doubt? Perhaps an awareness of the human element involved. Priests, for all their learning and sacred status, were still human. Some were undoubtedly more skilled, more intuitive, more genuinely connected to the divine than others. There might have been rumors of priests who were more easily swayed by a larger offering, or those whose interpretations seemed consistently and conveniently to align with the interests of the powerful. Or maybe just a general understanding that even the wisest interpreter could sometimes get the celestial signals a bit cross. It's like even with the best divine Wi-Fi connection imaginable, sometimes the otherworldly messages probably got a bit garbled in transmission, or perhaps the priestly modem was just having an unusually off day and needed a good reboot with some extra temple incense. A quirky tidbit that hints at a certain level of critical engagement, or at least a desire for a good outcome, can be seen in some of the letters to the dead. These were messages inscribed on pottery bowls or papyrus left at tombs, where the living would appeal to their deceased relatives for help in the afterlife. Sometimes these letters include complaints or laments that things aren't going well on Earth, or that a problem persists despite prayers or offerings. While not direct skepticism of dream interpretation itself, it shows a willingness to question why divine or ancestral intervention isn't working, as hope to sign that faith wasn't always passive or unquestioning. Perhaps there was even a folk saying a bit of ancient Egyptian proverbial wisdom that cautioned against being too quick to believe every proclaimed omen without a measure of common sense, or that advised making extra offerings just in case the first interpretation wasn't quite hitting the divine mark. The immense pressure on the priests to deliver accurate, or at least acceptable and effective interpretations, must also be considered. Their reputation, and by extension, the temple's reputation, depended on it. This might have led in some cases to interpretations that were deliberately somewhat ambiguous, allowing for multiple eventualities to be seen as a fulfillment. Or perhaps a priest, sensing the deep anxiety of a dreamer, might subtly emphasize the more hopeful aspects of a mixed omen dream, or highlight the efficacy of the prescribed apotropaic rituals to provide comfort and a sense of agency. Egyptologists still debate the precise social mechanisms that existed for individuals, particularly commoners, to express doubt or dissatisfaction with a priestly dream interpretation, or to formally seek alternative interpretations from different priests or temples without risking accusations of impiety, disrespect for the gods, or challenging the established religious authority. It's also likely that there was a common understanding, even among the devout, that not every single fleeting image from a night's sleep was a profound message from Amun-Ra himself. There were likely big dreams and little dreams. A dream that was vivid, recurring, filled with clear divine symbolism, or experienced during a sacred period or incubation, would be treated with utmost seriousness. But a muddled dream, after perhaps overindulging in a feast of figs and honey cakes, the priest might gently suggest that the visitor from beyond in that particular instance was more likely to be indigestion than a deity. So while the bedrock of ancient Egyptian society was a profound faith in the reality of divine communication through dreams, and the vital role of priests in deciphering these messages, it's soothing. To imagine that the hum of human pragmatism, the occasional raised eyebrow of private doubt, and the quiet sifting of experience likely added a subtle, relatable counterpoint to this ancient reverence. The quest for meaning in the mysterious landscape of sleep was then, as now, a deeply human endeavor, navigated with a mixture of profound, faith-anxious hope, and perhaps just sometimes a little whisper that said, "Are you absolutely sure that flying crocodile means good luck with the barley harvest, esteemed seer?" The question of whether every ancient Egyptian accepted every priestly dream, interpretation with unquestioning faith, as we've just pondered, adds a fascinating layer of human complexity to their world of divine messages. While the system of dream interpretation was deeply ingrained, the occasional whisper of doubt or the pragmatic search for a more palatable meaning likely existed. But there was one category of dream visitor whose appearance in your night visions would almost certainly be taken with utmost seriousness. A category that bridged the gap between the divine, the ancestral, and the deeply personal, the spirits of the deceased. For in ancient Egypt, dreams were not just a potential hotline to the gods. They were also a vital and often quite active communication bridge between the two worlds of the living and the dead. You've already come to understand the profound importance the ancient Egyptians placed on the afterlife. Their elaborate tombs, their mummification practices, their extensive funerary texts like the Book of the Dead, all were dedicated to ensuring a successful transition and a blessed eternal existence for the deceased. A mainstream historical fact is that they believed the spirits of those who had successfully navigated the trials of the underworld and become justified aches or effective illumined spirits did not simply vanish into oblivion. These acts, particularly those of one's respected ancestors, were thought to retain an active interest and indeed a potential influence on the affairs of their living relatives. And one of the primary ways they could make their presence, their needs, or their wisdom known was by appearing in dreams. Forget a ghostly apparition rattling chains in a drafty corridor. Your ancient Egyptian ancestor, Great Uncle Senefer, perhaps might just pop into your dream to offer some pointed advice about your current life choices, or to complain rather pointedly that you haven't been quite diligent enough with the beer and bread offerings at his tomb chapel lately. Talk about some serious post-mortem micromanagement. So if you, as an ancient Egyptian, dreamt of a departed loved one, a parent, a grandparent, a spouse, this wasn't usually dismissed as mere grief-induced fancy. It was a significant event, a potential communication demanding attention. The deceased might appear to offer guidance on a difficult problem you were facing, drawing on their accumulated ancestral wisdom. They might issue a warning about an impending danger or a person who meant you harm. They could also come with requests. Perhaps their tomb needed repairs, or they felt their funerary cult the regular offerings of food, drink, and incense that sustained their spirit. And the afterlife was being neglected. A dream visit could be their way of lodging a formal complaint with the living management. The nature of the dream, the demeanor of the deceased visitor, and any specific messages conveyed would all be carefully considered, often with the help of a priestly interpreter if the meaning wasn't immediately clear. Was the ancestor smiling and benevolent, offering comfort and good counsel? This would be seen as a blessing, a sign of their continued protection and favor. Or did they appear troubled, angry, or sorrowful? This could indicate that something was amiss, either in their own afterlife provisions or in the conduct of their living descendants, and that action was needed to restore harmony. You wouldn't just see dead people in your dreams. You'd see dead people who often still had very strong opinions, pressing needs, and occasionally some surprisingly accurate or alarmingly specific prophecies about your upcoming week. Made for some very interesting and sometimes rather stressful dream diaries, one imagines. A quirky tidbit that illustrates the active relationship with the dead is the practice of writing letters to the dead. These were actual messages often inscribed on pottery bowls filled with offerings or on papyrus, which would be left at the tomb. In these letters, the living might ask their deceased relatives for help with problems. An illness, an unjust accusation, a legal dispute, or even to stop another less benevolent spirit from troubling them. While not dreams themselves, these letters show the same underlying belief that the dead were accessible, attentive, and capable of intervening in the world of the living, and that communication, whether through a letter or a dream, was possible and important. Interpreting dreams from the dead required skill. The priest would need to help you discern if the message was truly from a benevolent Agi, offering genuine guidance, or if it might perhaps be a more troublesome, restless spirit mutt, or even a deceptive entity masquerading as a loved one. The identity of the deceased in the dream was crucial. A vision of a revered and piously buried ancestor was far more likely to be trusted than a dream featuring someone who had died in disgrace or was known to have been a difficult character in life. The actions taken in response to such dreams were very real. If your deceased father appeared in a dream requesting more incense at his offering table, you would hasten to provide it. If your grandmother warned you against a particular business partner, you would certainly think twice before signing that papyrus contract. Fulfilling the requests of the benevolent dead and heeding their warnings was seen as essential for maintaining family well-being, ensuring ancestral blessings, and upholding Ma'at, which extended to the proper care and remembrance of those who had passed into the West. Neglecting these duties as revealed by a dream could lead to the withdrawal of ancestral protection and the incurring of misfortune. Egyptologists still debate the precise social dynamics and the full spectrum of emotional responses surrounding how dream messages attributed to specific ancestors were validated and acted upon within an ancient Egyptian family or local community, and how much the definitive interpretation and the resulting course of action were shaped by the authority of priestly council versus the collective consensus and emotional interpretation of the family members themselves. What is undeniable is that for the ancient Egyptians, the veil between the world of the living and the realm of the dead was a permeable one, and dreams were one of the most vital bridges that spanned that divide. These nocturnal encounters were not just fleeting images. They were potent interactions, conversations across time and existence, ensuring that the bonds of kinship, the wisdom of ancestors, and the obligations of the living to the dead remained a powerful and ever-present force playing out nightly in the mysterious theater of sleep, under the watchful, starry eyes of the desert sky. The dream bridge to the realm of the dead, as you've now imagined, allowed ancient Egyptians a precious, if sometimes unsettling, conduit to their departed ancestors, reinforcing family bonds and the continuity of life beyond the veil. From these intimate ancestral encounters to the grand pronouncements of state-shaping royal visions and the everyday anxieties of peasants hoping for a good harvest, it's clear that dreams and their priestly interpretation permeated every level of Egyptian society. As our journey through this mysterious nocturnal world nears its end, you might find yourself reflecting on the ultimate purpose, the grand design behind this intense focus on understanding the messages that arrived in sleep. And at the heart of it all, you would find once again that supreme Egyptian ideal Ma'at, in all her balanced, truthful glory sought and maintained even in these moonlit messages. A mainstream historical fact is that a fundamental aim of almost all religious and magical practices in ancient Egypt, including the intricate art of dream interpretation, was the establishment, maintenance, and restoration of Ma'at. This wasn't just about individual good fortune or avoiding personal disaster. It was about ensuring that one's life, and by extension, the life of the community and even the cosmos, remained aligned with divine order, truth, justice, and harmony. Dreams in this context were often seen as direct indicators of the state of Ma'at in a person's world. A good, clear, positive dream, one filled with auspicious symbols, was a sign that you were living in balance, that the gods were pleased, and that Ma'at prevailed in your sphere. It was like getting a celestial thumbs up, a divine, "keep up the good work." So Ma'at was essentially the universe's preferred operating system, and dreams were like the system diagnostics report. The priests, they were the highly skilled, deeply revered 8 support team tasked with making sure your personal spiritual software wasn't about to crash due to an unforeseen divine error message or a poorly configured offering. Conversely, a disturbing, chaotic, or ominous dream was a clear warning that Ma'at had been disturbed. Perhaps you had unknowingly offended a god, or broken a sacred taboo, or an enemy was working malevolent magic against you, or simply that a period of misfortune was approaching. The dream was the symptom. The underlying cause was an imbalance, a tear in that sacred fabric of order. The priest's interpretation, therefore, was not just about telling you what the dream meant in a predictive sense. It was about diagnosing the nature of the disturbance to Ma'at, and crucially prescribing the actions, the offerings, the purifications, the apotropaic rituals, the changes in behavior, necessary to restore that balance, to mend that tear, and to bring your life back into alignment with cosmic harmony. For Pharaoh, as you've seen, this had implications for the entire kingdom. His dreams could reflect the state of Ma'at in the land itself, an interpretation that led to the building of a temple. The performance of a state ritual or a just policy was an act of upholding Ma'at on a grand scale, ensuring the continued favor of the gods. The regular flooding of the Nile, the fertility of the land, and the protection of Egypt from its enemies. But for you, the ordinary Egyptian, the concern was more personal, though no less vital. A dream interpreted by your local priest guiding you to make peace with a neighbor you had quarreled with, or to offer a specific prayer to a neglected household deity, or to simply be more diligent in your work and honest in your dealings. These were all ways of restoring Ma'at in your own small corner of the universe. It was understood that personal harmony contributed to communal harmony, and communal harmony contributed to cosmic harmony. It was all interconnected. Forget a modern life coach giving you affirmations. The ancient Egyptians had their dream priests to help them actively align their personal Ka with the universe's grand design of Ma'at. This probably involved fewer motivational posters and a great deal more carefully considered offerings to various ibis-headed, lion-headed, or crocodile-headed deities depending on the specific imbalance detected in your nocturnal visions. A quirky and rather lovely tidbit that reflects this desire to proactively live in Ma'at, even in one's dream life, is the concept that your waking actions influenced your dreams. Some wisdom texts suggest that a person who lived a just honest and pious life, who respected the gods and their fellow humans, was more likely to receive good, clear, and reassuring dreams. Keeping your heart light as a feather in your daily conduct, just as it would need to be for the final judgment, before Osiris was perhaps also seen as a way to ensure your dream receiver was tuned to the more positive divine frequencies. The entire system of dream interpretation, with its learned priests, its ancient dream books, its careful analysis of symbols, and its prescribed rituals, can thus be seen as a sophisticated cultural mechanism for managing anxiety, reinforcing moral behavior, and providing a sense of order and meaning in a world that, for all its Nile-given regularity, could still feel unpredictable and freighted with unseen spiritual forces. It was a way of ensuring that the moonlit messages received during sleep did not lead to chaos or despair, but were instead channeled, understood, and acted upon in ways that supported the individual's well-being and the overall stability of society. Egyptologists still debate the precise balance within ancient Egyptian religious thought concerning the extent to which dream interpretation practices were primarily focused on addressing individual anxieties and securing personal good fortune, versus serving broader, more systemic societal functions, such as reinforcing priestly authority and temple economies, legitimizing state actions through the mechanism of divinely sanctioned royal dreams, or subtly managing collective social behavior and reinforcing conformity through these widely shared belief systems about divine communication and its consequences. What seems profoundly clear as you drift towards the end of this exploration is that for the ancient Egyptian, every dream held the potential to be a sacred encounter, a moment where the veil thinned and the voice of the divine, the ancestral, or the portentous could be heard. The priests, with their arcane knowledge, stood ready to translate these enigmatic whispers from the night, guiding each soul from the mightiest pharaoh to the humblest peasant on their ongoing journey to live rightly, to understand their fate, and to walk always as best they could in the illuminating and harmonizing light of Ma'at. Their complex pursuit of cosmic harmony through the careful sifting of dream sand was, you might reflect, a bit like trying to keep a very elaborate, divinely inspired, and incredibly sacred sandcastle perfectly smooth and unblemished, requiring constant vigilance, delicate adjustments based on the latest celestial tide reports, and a deep abiding understanding of which way the divine winds were blowing. And so, as the moon begins its slow descent, and the first faint promise of dawn touches the eastern desert horizon, our journey into the world of ancient Egyptian dream interpretation and the priestly wisdom that sought to unravel its moonlit messages gently comes to a close. The enigmatic symbols, the divine visitations, the rituals of appeasement and gratitude can now rest like ancient secrets guarded by the desert sands. Imagine the great temples, their massive pylons still cloaked in the pre-dawn shadows. A deep stillness settled over their sacred precincts. The Nile flows on as it always has, a timeless silver ribbon through the land. Its quiet murmur, perhaps the only sound save for the distant stirring of unseen wildlife or the first soft calls of waking birds. The air is cool, carrying the fresh scent of the river and the subtle fragrance of incense that might still linger from last evening's rites. The myriad stars, those celestial lamps that watched over the dreamers of Kemet, begin to pale, their ancient light dimming before the approaching glory of Ra. Let this profound sense of peace, of ancient wisdom, and of cosmic order settle into your own mind. The need to interpret, to understand, to avert, or embrace can now subside. The priests have closed their sacred scrolls, the supplicants have received their guidance, and Ma'at for this night has been served. There are no more visions to decode, no more omens to ponder. There is only this moment, this quiet transition from the mysteries of the night to the clarity of the coming day. Allow your body to be heavy and at ease, your mind calm and untroubled, like the still surface of a sacred temple pool reflecting the fading starlight. Let your breath be as gentle and regular as the timeless pulse of the Nile, carrying you effortlessly into the deep, restorative embrace of sleep, where all is tranquil and only the most peaceful and harmonious dreams may find you. The journey through the moonlit messages of ancient Egypt, deciphered with such care and gravity by its learned priests, has shown us a world where dreams were a vital conduit to the divine, a means of maintaining Ma'at in both personal lives and the affairs of the state. This intricate system of interpretation, with its dream books, its symbolic analyses, its apotropaic rituals, and its temple incubations, flourished for millennia along the banks of the Nile. But as the pharaonic era eventually waned and new empires rose and fell across the ancient world, you might wonder, did this profound Egyptian engagement with the mysteries of the night simply vanish like a forgotten dream itself? Or did some faint echoes of its wisdom, some lingering influences of its practices, find their way into the lore and traditions of subsequent cultures? Ancient Egypt, even in its later periods under Greek and Roman rule, held an immense mystique for the wider Mediterranean and Near Eastern world. It was widely regarded as a land of primordial wisdom, potent magic, and unfathomable antiquity. Thinkers, travelers, and seekers of knowledge from Greece, Rome, and beyond looked to Egypt as a source of ancient truths and esoteric knowledge. A mainstream historical fact is that while direct, provable linear influence of specific Egyptian dream interpretation texts or practices on all later cultures is complex and often debated by scholars, Egypt's highly developed system of oniromancy, the art of dream interpretation, represents one of the earliest and most sophisticated such traditions in the ancient world. It undoubtedly contributed to a broader cultural milieu in the Near East and Mediterranean, where dreams were considered deeply significant, potentially influencing or running parallel to the dream interpretation practices that developed in later Greek, Roman, and even some early Abrahamic traditions. It's like ancient Egypt was the original long-running hit podcast on decoding your divine DMs from the Duat, and other ancient cultures definitely tuned in, took notes, and perhaps even tried to launch their own spin-off series. Consider the Greeks, for example. They too had a rich tradition of dream interpretation, with figures like Artemidorus of Daldis in the 2nd century CE, compiling extensive dream dictionaries. While Greek oniromancy had its own unique philosophical underpinnings, there were undeniable points of contact and potential cross-pollination of ideas, especially during the Hellenistic period, when Egypt itself was ruled by the Greek Ptolemies and the great city of Alexandria became a melting pot of cultures and knowledge. The Greek practice of temple incubation, particularly at sanctuaries of the healing god, Asclepius, bears striking resemblances to the Egyptian tradition of seeking healing dreams at the shrines of deities like Imhotep or Serapis, who himself was a syncretic Greco-Egyptian deity whose cult became immensely popular. Did the Greeks borrow this directly, or was it a parallel development? The lines are often blurry. Similarly, within the broader ancient Near Eastern context from which the Hebrew Bible emerged, dreams play a hugely significant role as a medium for divine revelation. Stories like Joseph interpreting Pharaoh's dreams of Cain and corn, or Daniel interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's visions, highlight a shared cultural understanding across the region that dreams, especially royal dreams, could carry prophetic weight, and that skilled interpreters were essential. Given the centuries of interaction, both peaceful and conflictual, between Egypt and its Levantine neighbors, including periods when Hebrews resided in Egypt, it's plausible that certain Egyptian ideas about the nature of dreams and methods of their interpretation might have seeped into the general consciousness of the region. Tracing these echoes with absolute certainty, however, is a challenging task for historians and Egyptologists. Direct textual borrowings are rare. More often, what we might see are similarities in underlying concepts. The idea that gods speak through dreams, the importance of symbolism, the binary classification of dreams as good or bad, and the need for ritual action in response to them. These could be the result of indirect cultural diffusion, ideas traveling along trade routes or through migrating peoples, or they could simply be independent parallel developments as different societies grappled with the universal human experience of dreaming and sought to make sense of it within their own distinct cultural and religious frameworks. A quirky and perhaps illustrative tidbit is how certain very specific Egyptian dream symbols, or their unique interpretations, perhaps those based on intricate puns in the Egyptian language, might occasionally appear somewhat out of context or with altered meaning in later Greek or Roman dream interpretation texts. It's like a phrase from an ancient song being sampled in a new tune. The original meaning perhaps lost or transformed, but a faint echo of the old melody still discernible. Or consider the cult of Serapis, which, as mentioned, spread widely throughout the Roman Empire, carrying with it Egyptian-style temples. Serapeia that were renowned centers for incubation and oracular dreams, directly transplanting a very Egyptian practice into the heart of the Greco-Roman world. So if a Roman senator or a Greek philosopher had a particularly troubling dream, you have to wonder if their first thought wasn't, I recall hearing about those incredibly serious and highly effective dream priests down in Egypt, or at that new Serapis temple just outside town. They seem to have a papyrus scroll or a divine incubation chamber for just about every nocturnal eventuality. Egyptologists and historians of religion continue to engage in lively debate regarding the precise nature, extent, and pathways of any Egyptian oneromantic influence on neighboring and subsequent cultures. They carefully analyze textual parallels, iconographic similarities, and archaeological evidence of cultural exchange, always seeking to distinguish between demonstrable direct transmission of specific texts, beliefs, or practices, the more subtle and indirect cultural diffusion of general ideas about the significance of dreams, and fascinating instances of independent, parallel development of remarkably similar dream interpretation systems in different societies as they each sought to understand the universal human experience of the night vision. What is clear is that ancient Egypt's long and profound engagement with the world of dreams, its development of sophisticated interpretive techniques, and its deep belief in the power of these nocturnal messages did not occur in a cultural vacuum. As one of the oldest, most influential, and most revered civilizations of the ancient world, its wisdom, including its dream wisdom, likely radiated outwards, contributing to the rich tapestry of beliefs and practices that characterize the ancient Mediterranean and Near Eastern understanding of those mysterious visitors from beyond the veil of sleep. The specific incantations of an Egyptian lector priest might have faded with time, but the fundamental human quest to find meaning in the moonlit messages of our dreams, a quest so central to ancient Egyptian life, certainly endured. The echoes of ancient Egyptian dream wisdom, as we've considered, may have subtly resonated through later cultures, contributing to a broad human understanding that the visions of the night carry weight and meaning. As our own journey through the practices of those priestly interpreters along the Nile draws to its final moments, we find ourselves contemplating not just their specific methods, but the truly timeless and universal human quest to understand the messages that surface from the mysterious depths of sleep. For the enduring mysteries of the night, it seems, have captivated humanity for as long as we have closed our eyes and drifted into other realms. A mainstream historical fact is that the interpretation of dreams has been a significant human preoccupation across virtually all known cultures and throughout recorded history. From the clay tablets of Mesopotamia, detailing dream omens even before the pharaohs built their pyramids, through the oracles and incubation sanctuaries of ancient Greece and Rome, across the spiritual traditions of Asia, Africa, and the Americas, and right into the modern era with the development of psychological theories. By figures like Freud and Jung, humanity has persistently sought to find meaning, guidance, or psychological insight within the often enigmatic theater of dreams. It seems we've been collectively hitting the "wait, what on earth did that mean?" button after a particularly vivid or bizarre dream since the very dawn of self-awareness. The ancient Egyptians, as you've seen, were certainly early and remarkably sophisticated pioneers in this endeavor. Their meticulous dream books, their understanding of symbolism, however culturally specific their rituals for incubation and for averting ill omens, all speak to a society that took the content of night visions incredibly seriously, viewing them as vital communications from a wider, often unseen reality. Their core belief that dreams weren't just random neural firings, but could be messages from gods, spirits, or the deep well of ancestral knowledge, resonates with a fundamental human intuition that many of us still feel today when we awaken from a particularly powerful or emotionally charged dream. Of course, our modern frameworks for understanding dreams have largely shifted from an external divine source to an internal psychological one. We speak of the subconscious, of archetypes of processing daily experiences of wish fulfillment, or of the brain's unique activity during REM sleep. Yet the underlying human urge remains strikingly similar to that of your ancient Egyptian counterpart, to make sense of these strange nocturnal narratives, to understand what they might be telling us about ourselves, our anxieties, our hopes, our relationships, or even our path forward. So whether you're consulting a learned priest in a leopard skin and a cloud of Kai-Fi incense, or perhaps in more recent times, discussing your anxieties with a therapist, or even just looking up symbols in a modern dream dictionary app, the papyrus scroll of our age, perhaps the fundamental quest to understand the messages from within persists. What we still share so profoundly with the ancient Egyptians is the raw experience of dreaming itself, the vividness, the emotional intensity, the occasional terrifying nightmare that leaves us shaken. The blissful dream that brings a sense of peace or joy, or the deeply perplexing vision that gnaws at our waking thoughts, demanding to be understood. We still dream of flying, of falling, of being chased, of losing precious things, or of encountering loved ones both living and departed. Archetypal experiences that likely populated the dreamscapes of Nile dwellers thousands of years ago, just as they do our own. A quirky and rather endearing modern echo of ancient anxieties can be found in the widespread, almost universal superstition about dreams of teeth falling out. A symbol that, as you'll recall from some Egyptian dream interpretations, often portended loss or misfortune. Some anxieties, it seems, are truly timeless. The ancient Egyptians, through their priests and their sacred texts, sought to bring order to this often chaotic inner world, to provide a framework for understanding, and to offer rituals that gave people a sense of agency in the face of uncertain omens. Their methods, the puns, the specific symbolic associations, the prescribed offerings, were unique to their culture and their time. But the underlying human need they addressed is one that continues to fascinate and puzzle us. Scholars across a multitude of disciplines, from neuroscience and psychology to anthropology, comparative religion and literary studies, still vigorously debate the ultimate nature, function, and meaning of dreaming, whether dreams are primarily a biological byproduct of the brain's nightly maintenance routines, complex psychological mechanisms for emotional regulation and memory consolidation, vestigial evolutionary tools, profound expressions of the collective unconscious, or if, for some individuals and in some specific contexts, they can still hold a dimension of transpersonal insight, creative inspiration, or even what might be described as spiritual significance. Perhaps the enduring mystery of dreams is in itself one of the universe's oldest and most beautifully kept secrets. A private theater where our deepest fears and highest aspirations play out nightly. The ancient Egyptian priests, with their scrolls and their rituals, were some of the first dedicated explorers of this inner landscape, striving to chart its symbols and understand its portents. While their specific interpretations might belong to a world long past their fundamental recognition of the power and significance of our night visions, those moonlit messages from the depths of ourselves, or perhaps from somewhere even further beyond, continues to echo. They remind us that the quest to understand the self in all its conscious and unconscious dimensions is an ancient and enduring human journey, one that begins anew every time we close our eyes and surrender to the night. And so as the moon begins its slow descent and the first faint promise of dawn touches the eastern desert horizon, our journey into the world of ancient Egyptian dream interpretation and the priestly wisdom that sought to unravel its moonlit messages gently comes to a close. The enigmatic symbols, the divine visitations, the rituals of appeasement and gratitude can now rest like ancient secrets guarded by the desert sands. Imagine the great temples, their massive pylons still cloaked. In the pre-dawn shadows, a deep stillness settled over their sacred precincts. The Nile flows on as it always has, a timeless silver ribbon through the land. Its quiet murmur, perhaps the only sound, save for the distant stirring of unseen wildlife or the first soft calls of waking birds. The air is cool, carrying the fresh scent of the river and the subtle fragrance of incense that might still linger from last evening's rites. The myriad stars, those celestial lamps that watched over the dreamers of Kemet, begin to pale, their ancient light dimming before the approaching glory of Ra. Let this profound sense of peace, of ancient wisdom, and of cosmic order settle into your own mind. The need to interpret, to understand, to avert, or embrace can now subside. The priests have closed their sacred scrolls, the supplicants have received their guidance, and Maat for this night has been served. There are no more visions to decode, no more omens to ponder. There is only this moment, this quiet transition from the mysteries of the night to the clarity of the coming day. Allow your body to be heavy and at ease, your mind calm and untroubled, like the still surface of a sacred temple pool reflecting the fading starlight. Let your breath be as gentle and regular as the timeless pulse of the Nile, carrying you effortlessly into the deep, restorative embrace of sleep, where all is tranquil and only the most peaceful and harmonious dreams may find you.